Well, migrants have been arriving in small boats in large numbers on European coastlines for at least 2 decades. In 2002, I spent a week reporting from Lampedusa, Italian territory off the coast of North Africa. There, the locals, believe it or not, had stopped eating seafood. They were put off, they said, by the thought that so many migrants had perished, had drowned in the waters off their island. Well, the problem since then has grown like Topsy. Soon there were rickety boats throughout the Mediterranean and nobody had a clue how to deal with the problem. Until, that is, it seems far away, Australia came up with a workable plan, they said, for which they were much criticised, but which, I have to say, inconveniently for some left-wing commentators, seem to have had the advantage of working. Canberra started to send migrants to have their asylum applications processed 3,000 miles away in the Pacific. The numbers arriving in Oz tailed off sharply. How much by? Well, it started in the early 2000s, but by 2013, for instance, there was a peak of 20,000 migrants arriving by boat in Oz. Fast forward 2 years later, none did. If nobody's travelling, the argument runs, nobody is drowning. Joining me, the former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia, Alexander Downer. Mr. Downer, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. Why did the Australian experiment work, do you think?
Well, because the people smugglers who were charging people to make a hazardous journey from Indonesia to Australia weren't able to deliver. They weren't able to get those people to Australia, so no one would buy a passage anymore. As you know, you wouldn't buy a trip on a plane to Paris if you knew that plane was never going to go to Paris. So it was the same principle. Basically, we destroyed the business model for the people smugglers. So, you know, they couldn't make any money out of bringing people to Australia illegally.
And theoretically, I mean, that sounds straightforward enough. But practically, Alexander Downer, how did it work and what were the pitfalls?
So we sort of developed the policy as it went along. We had no precedents, and we developed it in the early 2000s. Basically what we did was we said to people who tried to get to Australia in this dangerous way, you will never be able to settle in Australia if you try to get to our country that way. So we will pick you up, and we made an arrangement with Nauru, and we'll take you to Nauru, and you'll be processed there. And if you're not a refugee, you'll be sent back to your home country. And if you are a refugee, you can either stay in Nauru or we'll find some other country which is safe for you. We won't send you back to your country of origin, of course. And that was that. But what you won't do is be able to come to Australia, because we have a pathway for migrants, but also for refugees to come to Australia. Australia resettles around 20,000 refugees a year. That's the pathway. Otherwise, our only obligation is that you are protected from the persecution that you might have been subjected to in your home country, but that doesn't mean you can come and live in Australia.
I was just talking a few moments ago to an Australian national who painted a picture, actually, of a policy that was in flux very often, and it changed according to the complexion of the party in power. So when the other lot got in, they reversed some of your measures.
They did, though they then reversed their own policy as time went on, because so the Liberal Party is the equivalent of the Conservative Party in Australia. The Liberal government of John Howard introduced this scheme that I've described initially in around 2001. Then the Labor Party won the election in 2007 and they abandoned this policy, and then large numbers of people started coming again on these boats. And it was in particular when a boat sank against the rocks, actually, in Christmas Island between Australia and Indonesia. And a large number of people were killed and drowned by this catastrophe, that the public said enough is enough. You shouldn't be subjecting people to making these incredibly dangerous journeys. And I would say it's the same thing with the Channel crossing. I mean, they're coming in tiny boats in little more than rafts, actually. And, I mean, people should not be subjected to these incredibly dangerous undertakings. It should be stopped. So we did, the Labor government in Australia reversed policy And then when Tony Abbott became the Prime Minister, the Liberal Party got back into power, that is the Conservatives. They reinforced the policy. And you heard in your introduction, you talked about the success of the policy. I mean, basically, people don't come to Australia that way at all now.
And, you know, it's not just that what was happening was unsafe, deeply unsafe. It was deeply unjust. I mean, there is something kind of Darwinian about the struggle to get into the UK now or to get into Australia then. And like with all Darwinian struggles, it's better won, more easily won by the hale, the hearty young men, rather than those who need our help the most, namely very often people who aren't so well or are older or they're infirm or they've got small children.
Well, in the case of the UK, I think I'm right in saying something like 80% of the people who make these hazardous channel crossings are young men under the age of around 30, and something like 70% of them are unmarried. So, you know, that picture tells you quite a story. They are paying around £3,000 a head to go on this dangerous journey. I mean, and I think, whatever side of the argument you take, this practice should be stopped. And you've got two choices. One of them is to destroy the business model of the people smugglers and sending people to Rwanda for processing instead of allowing them to come to the UK is a very good way of doing it. Or else send ferries across to collect them and have an open border policy and have no immigration policy and just take anybody who wants to come to the UK into the country because you feel sorry for the 8 billion people who live around the world who don't live in the UK. You know, that could be a policy. I mean, I don't think many people would support it, but that could be a policy. But they are basically your policy choices. Let anyone come here, have an open borders policy, or close down these dangerous journeys.
Alexander Downer is a former Foreign Minister for Australia. We really appreciate your time and your thoughts today. Thanks very much indeed.